Hello everybody, welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we'll be doing a box office preview for this upcoming weekend, which has already seen Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 see some early box office returns, as the film had a fan screening on Monday and subsequently opened early on Tuesday, and has had several days since then. So we'll talk about what those numbers are, what those likely mean for the overall running box office for the film. There, of course, are a lot of people speculating that the movie might not be nearly as big as some had thought that it could be, because the numbers don't seem to be all that impressive. But again, I'll try to break down why I think these numbers are an early sign of a lot of hope for this movie, and why ultimately this coming weekend is going to be one of the most important times. And of course, that week 2 drop-off is going to be the most important indicator about where this film likely will end up worldwide by the end of its run. We'll also give an update on the film Sound of Freedom, as this movie is also continuing to do very well, punching well above its weight, more so than it should, even though, of course, people like Tony over at Deadline do not want to admit that that is the actual case, trying to instead try to spin some false narrative about this only being because of quote-unquote right-wing conservatism, and not because, hey, people are actually genuinely interested about learning more about such an evil topic in the world itself. Before any further, though, please make sure you smash that like button, that fire button, honestly, and smash the rumble button as well. Also, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification on. That way you know every time video or live stream goes live on the channel. So first off, starting off over with Tony over at Deadline, as it says right here, it has grossed so far $23+ million over the course of the first few days of its release. It says it saw an $8.3 million take on Thursday, repping a 47% decline from Wednesday, opening plus previews of $15.5 million. A two-day total is now at $23.8 million from over 4,000 screens. Hopefully this film spikes today. I mean, it will spike today. It's just how much that's a cinema score and 4.5 stars and 88% on Screen Engine Comcore's post-track mean. Now remember, I just don't quite understand why they continue to use CinemaScore as a reliable metric, when we all know CinemaScore does not release any data other than the score itself. You don't know exactly what theaters themselves that these reports are coming from. You don't know the real demographics of these films either. Honestly, I think post-track seems to be a little bit more reliable, as at the very least you do get a little bit more information, not only a score with the 4.5 stars, but also a would you recommend, would you strongly recommend this film? And the film getting an 88% would definitely recommend score, I think, is a very important factor there, because this movie is very, very good. Now, is it a perfect film? No, those films don't really ever exist, but it is still a very well-made film that I think has gotten, again, very clearly from that stat alone. CinemaScore, again, it's great that it's got an A for CinemaScore, but let's just be honest, CinemaScore is really not all that reliable when it all comes, when it's all said and done. What I do think is reliable is not only people thinking highly of the film, but also would you actually further recommend other people to go and see it? And I think overall, universally, we have seen the vast majority of people who have come out of this movie have said this is a great film, it's worth seeing in theaters, and that everyone else should go and see it. Again, not everyone's going to feel that way, but the vast majority of people have, and that is a very important factor. As we all know, word of mouth is such an important factor when it comes to movies these days, especially in the modern era and the modern day of Hollywood. And I think that ultimately this is a very important factor for it. It goes on to say, a $90 million 5-day seems unlikely, with rivals spotting $50 million over 3 days and only $73 million over the 5-day. So apparently that is what is going to be expected at this point in time. They are now actually downgrading what they suspect the movie will end up making, thinking the film will only get to $73 million. Here is, of course, the big factor that I think a lot of people aren't quite understanding. First, I think a lot of people, and I've seen this in the comment section, I've seen this in other comments online, a lot of people didn't even know the film had already been released. We already live in a world where the vast majority of people are not even fully back into the general going to the film, right? There are not, a lot of good movies that are coming out that would get people into that pattern or get people back into that pattern. So when you see a movie like this coming out and you see the trailers for it, yeah, you get that date all the time of, oh, it gets released on this day, special fan screenings on this day, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to understand exactly what that means in the grand scheme of things, right? Because the vast majority of people still understand, oh no, movies come out on Thursday night, and then they come out wide release on Friday, and then they have a full release on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So I personally would not be surprised if the Friday, Saturday numbers end up being a lot more impressive. And you also have to take this into account as well. If we start to see a weekend take on this movie being that typical, or what they suspect originally would have suspected of this film being a $90 million to $100 million 5-day opening, that to me I think will be a major factor, because what that will show is not only did it have those strong numbers up front, but it continued to have one of the strongest openings of the entire franchise. When you adjust for inflation, this film is still right up there. Again, going into the weekend with that $90 million 5-day, That would put this film right up there with the other films in the franchise, because originally they thought the film was going to get around the $60 million plus mark in the 3-day opening, which again would be roughly around what the previous 2 films had gotten. And so again, that's even when you adjust for inflation, which means that the film right now is seeming, or is at least projected to perform on that same level. Now, that's a very important factor, because having it perform on the same level, and if it does see similar drop-offs as that film and those previous films had seen, then that would mean this film's chances of doing very well worldwide are going to be likely to happen. Also, remember that those are just looking at the domestics, again, comparing those early domestic numbers between those movies and not looking at the international. We could very well see the international numbers coming in a lot higher than what we're seeing from the domestic marketplace, even higher than what the projections likely could have been, and that ultimately could mean the film could do a lot better. Now, again, am I saying the film is a success or is a failure? I can't really say so at this point in time. It's still way too early to tell. And ultimately, the release schedule is so bizarre and weird on this. Most films don't have random Monday, screenings on a release week. You don't typically have, especially when there's no real major holidays to look forward to, or to really help boast any of these numbers, to have a Monday fan screening event and then early screening starting on Tuesday around 2 p.m. I know in my market, the earliest showing was around 2 p.m. and then having a full release going Wednesday on. Again, that's a very bizarre schedule. That is a very weird schedule that most people are not used to. Most people are still working. Most people still have stuff going on in their life, and they are not used to having something outside of that typical Thursday, Friday release. So again, we'll know a lot more once the Friday numbers come in. So once we get those updates tomorrow, I think that'll give us a better idea of whether this film will likely get to the $90 million 5-day opening that was originally thought, or could get closer to the $73 million that apparently is now being adjusted. But I do think it is important to provide that context out there that, again, what Dead Reckoning tried to do here was try to take advantage of having access to those premium format screens when Oppenheimer is going to kick it out in a matter of about a week. Again, Oppenheimer, of course, going to take over those massive screens, from the IMAX all the way to the other premium format screens. So trying to get those extra seats in. But ultimately, it's the word of mouth. And we've known this for a long time, that when even movies have not the greatest of openings or have smaller than expected openings, if the word of mouth on the film has been overwhelmingly positive, then that has usually led to very, very strong legs, right? So good week 1 and week 2 drop-offs and so on and so forth, right? We saw this happen with a film like Puss in Boots, for instance. That film did not have a very good opening, but because the word of mouth on it was very strong, it ended up staying in the game quite a bit and did very, very well. You look at a film like Top Gun Maverick as well. Top Gun Maverick opened up worldwide to a number, and interestingly enough, the original number coming in for this movie, right, coming in for Dead Reckoning Part 1 was around $250 or $240 million or so. Well, if you actually go back in time to Top Gun Maverick's global opening, that movie opened to around $250 million in its opening weekend, and then ballooned all the way up to about $550 million by the end of its second weekend. So I think that ultimately is going to be something that we have to look at, is not only what the global take this weekend is, but also what is it going to be by the second weekend, because as we all know, then Top Gun Maverick was able to have such strong holds from week to week to week, it was able to balloon to well over $1 billion. Now, do I think that this film is a guaranteed $1 billion film? I don't think it's guaranteed. Do I think that it's likely? Again, based on everything that I've seen and based on the early projections going to the weekend, I do still think it's possible, especially when you take into account how positive the reaction has been for this movie. I did also want to give just a quick update before going further into the numbers for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Still a long title, by the way, and just point out the fact that Jim Caviezel's Sound of Freedom, which again continues to destroy the Hollywood narrative and continue to drive a lot of these Hollywood people just completely insane, is still doing very well. Not only did it take the #1 spot on Monday, but has continued to show itself to be quite a formidable movie. Interestingly enough, we have numbers right now early from Thursday showing a 47% drop for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, but if you go to the previous charts, you'll see that even though Mission Impossible was able indeed to take over that spot, look at where Sound of Freedom is. Not only did it come in the #2 spot over Insidious, The Red Door, a brand new film, but also it continues to be doing better than a film that only has a few days more on it, which was Indiana Jones Dial of Destiny, continues to also to defeat films like Elemental, etc. So the fact that that movie is doing as well as it is, and it's seeing increases in its overall daily box office, is very, very impressive. So again, going back to it, even back to Tuesday, look at what's coming in second place, Sound of Freedom. So this movie is continuing to do very well. It has already gotten to well over $50 million. There is a chance that this film could get upwards of 100 plus million in the domestic marketplace. And let's just say if it sees very similar numbers to this over the course of the next few days, over the course of the next few weeks, then I think that absolutely could be a possibility. And again, I don't know if they have any plans to do an international release on this movie. But ultimately, I think that that also could also help bolster those numbers a little bit. But let's go back to Mission Impossible, as I know that's what a lot of people are focused on today. Again, so far, it's only made $23.8 million. But remember, these are pretty early numbers. I don't really know offhand of any other film that has had a similar release to this movie, that has had a non-holiday to work with, has had a Monday opening where it had, again, a fan screening, singular screening on a Monday, and then has gone on to other daily performances in the way that it has. So I don't really know a film that could compare in this way. Whenever you hear people saying, oh, this film could set a 5-day record opening for the entire franchise, you're not really comparing apples to apples there, right? Because you're saying, okay, the first 5 days of this movie versus the first 5 days of the other movies. And let's just, again, try to see if we can pull up for a second why that really wouldn't be the most fair thing in either direction to say whether this film is doing really, really well or whether this film is doing really, really poorly. So let's bring this up against 2018's Mission Impossible Fallout. So here's the big problem, right? So one, we don't have the first Friday or Saturday numbers yet, right? And so already, if you're going to say the 5-day opening versus Fallout, okay, well, Mission Impossible Fallout did not open until the Thursday. So for its 5-day, right, you would have to then have only the first Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Whereas in the case of Dead Reckoning Part 1, it had an incredibly early release with screenings starting as early as Monday in its opening week, and then having actually its first Tuesday and Wednesday coming in that early time frame where a lot of people are not typically used to going to see movies, right? Waiting for early reviews to come out, waiting for word of mouth to come out. But also, again, most people are used to having that Thursday, Friday release schedule. So I think that comparing the 5 days to each of these would not be the most accurate thing to do. So again, the first 5 days for Fallout, for instance, again, 26 million would be its Thursday and Friday numbers. You would then get to its first weekend of around 70. So again, even if the film does end its first weekend around $50 million or so. Again, that's still, again, obviously that would be off from this, and this is not the most up-to-date number, but also keep in mind, I don't think it's going to be that low because I do think the Friday and Saturday, Sunday numbers are going to come in a lot higher than what the weekday numbers have been, as again, a lot of people have been at work. But then you go on to say, okay, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, so $88 million is what was, again, the first 5 days of Fallout. Now, to compare that to the very, very early release, which, again, there's not a lot of films that can really say they had a similar release, especially on a non-holiday frame, it is a very difficult thing to really compare those two things to each other, to compare those two metrics to one another. So ultimately, what does that mean? It means we got to wait and see what the actual Friday, Saturday numbers are. And hey, if they end up coming in underneath where Mission Impossible Fallout came in, that wouldn't be too surprising, seeing that it's made $23 million so far in the early release. But if it's vastly below these numbers, then I would say there could be some cause for concern. But if we're talking about numbers where it's coming in maybe a $20 million Friday or a $23 million Saturday, those would not be that far off and would be easily be able to be made up by the early release schedule, and especially with a good positive word of mouth and what likely will be a very small drop off from week 1 to week 2, even losing premium format screens. Because remember, yes, premium format screens bring in more money. However, if a good movie has good reviews, has good word of mouth, even if you lose those major theaters, you're still not going to see massive catastrophic drops. And so I do suspect that that was likely what we'll end up seeing. But I do want to compare these numbers to show you why comparing the first 5 days really wouldn't be fair in either sense, because it's just a very different release schedule and a very different release time. Also, just a little bit of a box office preview as well. We do have some updated numbers. Right now, Barbie is actually expected to do so much better than what originally had been projected. Warner Brothers would need this, right? Warner Brothers needs this film to be amazing, needs this film to bring in money. Based on the interviews most recently, I have I have a lot of doubts, just say. I have a high number of doubts that this movie is not going to be very good, that it's going to be trying to pushing different types of messaging in the film as well. And I don't think that is what people are going to be going into the film expecting to see. It's interesting because a lot of the marketing for this movie has been, oh, this is for people who hate Barbie. This is people who love Barbie. Oh, this is a kid's movie, or this is not a kid's movie. And it's like, basically, it feels like the marketing doesn't know what this film actually is. And so I do think that could ultimately end up hurting it. Do I think the film's going to flop? I don't think so. It only costs $100 million versus Warner Brothers' typical cost of films, which tends to be closer to $200 million. But it'll be interesting to see where that film ends up. Also, even though this film has had a 32% increase, that has not hurt the chances for Oppenheimer, right? Oppenheimer has actually also seen an increase as well. So we likely will end up seeing a pretty interesting battle. I still would not be surprised if Barbie has a bigger opening, just because it has a much larger name recognition, but I obviously do believe that Oppenheimer will be the significantly better movie. But those are the numbers as they currently stand. Of course, the big news and discussion right now is over Dead Reckoning Part 1. Gotten so many people saying, oh, it looks like this film is a failure. It doesn't look like this film is doing all that well. But again, remember, going into the weekend, the projections were the 3-day would be, again, that's Friday, Saturday, Sunday would be 68.5, with its total cum going through the weekend being around $100.8 million. I do suspect that that likely could still happen. We will have a much better idea once we actually get Friday and Saturday numbers coming in. But I did think it was interesting nonetheless to see a lot of people, right, kind of downplaying this movie, saying it's not doing all that well, saying that we could see this film fail. It's too early really to tell, right? If anything, we're actually seeing some positives, because for this movie to have already made $23 million on such a weird, bizarre schedule is already impressive in and of itself, especially with its runtime. But we really won't know whether it's impressive or whether it was an early sign of things to come until we actually get these weekend numbers coming in. And then also, of course, those week 2 drop-off numbers. But those are numbers I stand. What are y'all's thoughts about these things? Let me know in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, let the fire button, and smash the rumble button as well. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a special shout out to all of my members at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and above, starting off first with my members over on Patreon: Father Luca Illich, Heimir Irie Hymason, Garrett Searles, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Orange Chat Reviews, check out his YouTube channel by the same name, Laura, the Monomator General's Story, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel, Eagle Rider, and Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name as well. To my subscribe star peeps, Zion Voders, Matt317, check out his Twitch channel by the same name, Fast Reaction, The R, Mr. Roy, J-Rod, The Beer Guru, and ZK Man, who you can check out over at xtheboundaries.co. And lastly, to my locals members, Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan, How About a Hockey Player, J.H. Schwalbach, and Robert Barnes, the amazing lawyer. So thank y'all very much for being my supporters at the Keep It the Bifrost level and above. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, go ahead and check out that top link in the video description below to find out ways to sign up to support the channel and to be able to get access to things like the shoutouts, but also to giveaways. I have an exclusive giveaways channel on my Discord server where I give away 4Ks, Blu-rays, all kinds of stuff, and also access to an exclusive podcast that I do once or twice a month, depending on what I'm able to get accomplished, especially over the course of this crazy, crazy busy summer. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.